Hello film fans and welcome to this episode of the Sherlockian. Now, we're well into December and this is the season for Christmas films and there's a lot of debate on which Christmas film is best. But that got me thinking, is there such a thing as a Christmas documentary? Well, I've never heard anyone else say it, but I think there is. So, throughout December, I'm going to be looking at my favourite kind of Christmassy documentaries, or rather, documentaries that get me in the mood for Christmas, if that makes sense, rather than documentaries about Christmas per se. And we're going to start off with a personal favourite of mine, Life of Mammals. Now, first of all, personal note. When I was about under the age of 10, this was one of the only documentaries we had on VCR. So I've watched this series probably more than any other in the entire BBC collection, or probably any documentary at all. So I almost know it back to front, and I don't know quite why it puts me in a Christmassy mood. It might be possibly a sort of feelings of nostalgia, but it's also the kind of the front of the DVD with a sort of the Siberian tiger running through the snow. A lot of Christmas films, they're always they have some kind of snow in them, don't they? Not all of them, obviously, because Die Hard's set in California, but a lot of Christmas films do, and I wonder if that's one of the reasons why it's kind of connected with Christmas in my head. But anyway, first of all, this is an absolutely cracking documentary series, almost goes without saying, and one that I hugely enjoy. And there's quite a lot of scenes that I really wanted to talk about, and this was one of the hardest series that I really had to try and pare down to, like, a 10-minute video about. But I'm going to try. Well, probably my favourite scene in it is, certainly the most beautiful scene in it, is the scene with the bats. This has got David Attenborough in front of the camera in this kind of, I imagine it was English, though I don't know this for certain, kind of, sort of very country setting, very idyllic, very pastoral, in kind of a mill stream. It's got all these bats flying around him. Now, I've been fortunate to go on some bat evenings, and it feels very much like that, only with, of course, much better camera equipment. So it brought back a lot of good personal memories for me, and it was just brilliant to see all these bats kind of flying around David Attenborough, and they get them coming right over in front of his face, but they also get some superb close-up photography of them hunting. Now, my favourite scene in it, and the one I always remembered, was the scene with the long-eared bats. Now, these are one of my favourite bats, and they've got such cool faces with the really small kind of snub noses, but the really massive ears, which are actually much bigger, almost than than half their body length. It's quite incredible, really. And scene shows this long-eared bat trying to hunt moths, and obviously it does use echolocation to kind of navigate, but once it gets to like striking distance, it then kind of switches its sonar off and its echolocation, and then kind of moves in on it using its ears, and it's absolutely brilliant scene of it trying to catch this moth which has landed, and first of all it tries to grab it through the leaf from the wrong side, and then it flies round to the right side after it realises its mistake and just hovers in front of it, and the moth and the bat kind of have a standoff, and finally the moth moves a little bit and the bat comes in and grabs it, and it's just absolutely cracking scene, very tense but also beautifully shot, and it really shows you how agile bats are. The fact it can hover in that position for so long is quite incredible, really. It's almost like hummingbird-like. The other scene, of course, which that is so famous in that particular sequence, is the bit with the natterer's bats catching spiders out of their webs, which is absolutely brilliant, and they do a really good job of showing it. Not exactly in slow motion, but probably, slower than is normal, and then coming right in, grabbing the spider right out of the centre of the web, and then pulling it back in that kind of elastic way as the web springs back is quite incredible, really gorgeously shot. I particularly like the scene where one of the spiders tries to jump out of the way and the bat misses it and then comes back in again and grabs it. And that scene is really, really cool and really gorgeously shot. Just the entire score in that sequence and all the footage is beautiful, and it's well up there with any modern documentary sequence. However, the other sequence I really remember from this show, and it's far less Christmassy, and I almost didn't include it because of that, is the scene with the sand hunting. That scene is absolutely brilliant and really, really memorable. I talk a lot about Simon King on this on this channel because he's one of my favourite cameramen. But in his autobiography, he talks about filming this sequence, and it's absolutely brilliant. Basically, the sequence is these sand people basically use a very old hunting technique, which is basically like, I think it's called an endurance hunt, where basically they run down their quarry through pure kind of stamina. It's absolutely incredible. And it has this amazing sequence where basically they're hunting a kudu, and one of them kind of breaks off from the others and runs through the bush, tracking it as he goes. And finally, the kudu is so exhausted that it just basically lies down in front of him and allows him to kill it with a spear from close range. And it's this really brilliant, moving. That sounds quite cold and brutal when I describe it like that, but actually, it's this really beautiful kind of moving sequence where this man and his quarry is kind of pitted against each other, and it does a really good job of making it not feel too cold or clinical, but rather it's showing it for what it is, which is basically subsistence living. And it's absolutely amazing. But Simon King talked a lot in his autobiography about filming this, and it's really, really funny because he's very honest and very open, and it's brilliant. He talks about when they first met the Sound people, and they kind of had a kind of like meet and greet for like the camera crew and the tribe they were working with. It's quite funny because he said, first of all, he was very surprised by how old they all were. He said the youngest man, who is the man you see most on screen, Klahoe, was actually, I think, even in his early 50s. And certainly he looks brilliant for it. I mean, I wouldn't have thought he was that old from just seeing him on screen. And all the others, were sort of middle-aged as well. So he said they were all a lot older than him and most of the camera crew. And so he was a bit surprised. He thought, really? You run down animals at your age? He said the other thing that was amazing was, he said how much they all smoked. He said they literally chain smoked like constantly while they were talking to them. And again, he sort of thought, wow, your lungs must be disgusting. I mean, can you really? And he said, and so he said he wasn't skeptical exactly, but he was a little bit uncertain. He sort of thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. But he said what was amazing is, obviously, he's quite a fit young man. I mean, used to humping camera equipment around. I mean, he's not, if you see Simon King, he's not an unfit bloke even now. So back then, he must have been quite fit. And a lot of the shots you see quite close up were filmed by him, basically running alongside them. Now, in his defense, he was carrying like heavy camera equipment while he was doing it. But he said he obviously ran a fraction of the distance that they did. And by the end of it, he said he was exhausted. He said literally almost on the edge of exhaustion. He was a bit stressed at the time anyway, because I think his father had just died. So it was obviously not in the best kind of emotional state anyway. But he said by the end, he said he was almost like on the floor with exhaustion. He said, and while the hunters were clearly tired, they weren't that tired. And he said it was amazing. He said he was literally blown away by the fact that these fairly middle-aged men with their smokers' lungs, but able to completely and utterly run him off off the ground. It wasn't even a contest, and he didn't even run most of it. He was in a Land Rover for quite long stretches. And he said he was just, really, really, really impressed by them. And he actually talks about the fact that their final scene after they kill the kudu, and the Krahoe does the kind of the ritual over it, where he kind of is this very moving scene. The score in it is absolutely beautiful, where he kind of rubs the sand onto the kudu's belly, and then he puts his hand in its mouth and picks out his saliva and rubs it on his knees. It's this kind of ceremony to kind of connect him with his quarry and release its spirit back into the earth, for want of a better word. Simon King did a really good job of shooting that with kind of these really lovely close-up shots. And he said, and then at the end, he said he kind of draws back from the scene and then just puts the camera up towards the sky, and the final shot is just of the sky, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It sounds a bit strange to describe it again, but it kind of really fits the setting. He kind of just draws the camera out, moves it up towards the sky, and leaves it like that for just a second, and then they cut away. And he said after that, he filmed that shot. He said laid down on the ground behind the Land Rover and cried, because he said he was just so overwhelmed by the whole experience. Now, I admit that's not very Christmassy, but it does kind of it's very emotional. Obviously, emotional scenes are a big part of Christmas films, and it just more than that, it's just a particular scene in that documentary. I think it's probably one of the most famous examples of it in the Life of Mammals generally. It's just gorgeous. I really, really enjoyed watching it. It's fantastic. And the other scene, and probably one of the reasons as well, I mentioned it before, David Attenborough does quite a lot in front of the camera in this series. He goes to see a blue whale. There's a lovely shot of him sort of like in a boat beside it, with his tail comes right up and he's very excited. And there's a lot of other sequences of him sort of moving around. He goes to watch elephants. Where is it? In those caves in I think it's Mount Kenya, but I might have made that up. Where you see the elephants going to mine salt with their tusks. And he actually stays out at night and watches them. And there's another sequence where he's in a village and a leopard comes right up to the outside of the door, where he's watching it with the camera, and he does look quite worried in that scene. So I always enjoy that bit. But the best sequence, I think, with him just out and about is the bit with the Siberian tiger. Now, I remember when I first watched this, as a child, obviously, I actually did genuinely think it's basically him walking around looking at tiger tracks. and it's intercut with sort of shots of a Siberian tiger kind of walking around, and then there's this brilliant scene where it suddenly lifts its head up and it seems to see him, and you kind of think, ooh. And then it seems to be stalking him, and it kind of intercuts with him just talking about tiger conservation with this tiger creeping around. You kind of think, somebody in the camera team really should warn him. And then suddenly it runs and you think, oh my goodness, he's about to get eaten. And then it cuts away and you see that there's actually a fence in the way, and it jumps up against the fence. And there's this lovely scene of him looking at the tiger and talking about it through the fence, with it kind of, it's kind of ambiguous as to whether it's, you know, trying to hunt him or whether it's just playing. It keeps rolling on the floor and in the snow and watching him. This is really lovely sequence. It's just gorgeous, and I understand entirely why, even though it's not very long, they actually put that on the front of the DVD because it looks amazing. The other bit after that is it actually shows the tiger hunt, and I think it's still probably my favourite tiger hunt ever on any documentary series, including ones just about tigers. It's not a complete hunt. I think you can actually tell that it's actually several hunts sort of spliced together. At one point, you actually see the tiger's head almost come up during the hunt, which is normally what they do when they become unsighted and about to stop. But I mean, I might be entirely wrong. It might be I might just be doing the film crew a huge injustice, and it was one tiger hunt shot together. But I think it's probably several spliced. Having said that, though, it's just gorgeous, and it really gives you a sense of the kind of power. For some reason, I always want to equate it with the Jungle Book, just the way it kind of films the Indian landscape, and it feels kind of mysterious and exciting. And it feels a bit like, you know, that kind of a presence that Shere Khan often has in films. And the way David Attenborough talks about tigers, he says before man created weapons, this was, you know, the ultimate killing machine on Earth, and it's just really beautiful and exciting, and the tiger feels really powerful in it. And it's a lovely way to end that particular sequence, and indeed that episode on meat eaters. It's just gorgeous and really exciting. I really enjoyed that bit. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my review of Life of Mammals. I appreciate there's a lot more I could have said. It's one of my favourite documentaries ever, so I could have talked about it, you know, for hours on end. But I appreciate you probably don't want to hear me talk about it for hours. But it's just brilliant. I feel it's very Christmassy just because it really gets that kind of right ethos. It's got the right mixture of kind of wonder, for me, nostalgia, obviously, but also just beauty and also pathos. It's absolutely fantastic. So I hopefully will be reviewing a few more kind of Christmassy documentaries, and if anyone's got any ideas of different things to review, I've got a few ideas obviously myself, but if anyone's got particular favourites they'd like me to look at, I'm only too happy to have a quick look at them and review them for you. You can also subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed this video, and you can also follow me on Twitter. There's a link in the description below. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, film fans, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.